my second graders to the Inn of 8 Happinesses, where we are learning about our missionary, Gladys Aylward. But can you remind me, in our story, are we at the Inn of 8 Happinesses yet? No, she's not there yet. But I want to tell you all about this next part of her life, where Gladys trusting God to take care of her. All right, are you ready? So in our story yesterday, the Lord provided for Gladys and took care of her, and she was able to finally buy that train ticket. So remember, she has a very long journey. She lives over here in the United Kingdom in a city called London, and she needs to travel from London all the way to China. It's a very long trip. But she's ready to start. She's ready to go. She's packed 2 huge suitcases full of things that she needs, and she's wearing something fancy called a petticoat. So it's kind of like a skirt, but she has many, 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 many pockets in her petticoat. I have a few pockets right here, and Gladys carried some things with her that were very important, like her passport. This is very important. A passport is what gives you permission. It's what lets you go from one country to another. And it says what country you're from and also sometimes what your job is. So Gladys's passport said she was from London and that she is a missionary. She also had special things with her like train tickets. This would be important. She had whatever money she had with her. She had a fancy pen with her. And of course, she's a missionary. So she has her Bible. Always her Bible, right? So she has her Bible, but all of these things that she's carrying, it makes her look so lumpy and bumpy and crazy. So, last but not least, she puts on a giant fur coat so that she has it for later when she needs to keep warm, even though right now in London it's not that cold, so she's a little warm, but it's okay. So she's covering up all her lumps and bumps. She has her coat. She says goodbye to her family, which is kind of sad. Have you guys ever felt a little sad when you say bye to a family member, like before a trip or when they leave from visiting? Right? Do we feel a little sad? So Gladys was feeling a little sad too. So she says goodbye, and she gets on the train, and guess what? God takes care of her. And immediately she meets an older couple, 2 people, and they're Christians too. Gladys feels like she just met family on this train. And they love her, and they commit to praying for her every single night for the rest of their lives. So she has a wonderful, encouraging start to her trip. But later on, their paths split ways, and Gladys stays on the train. And more passengers get off, and more soldiers get on. Remember, this is a dangerous train ride, right? So then eventually, she's the only non-military person on the train. And it's crazy in there. They're loud, it's bustling. It's kind of like in that auditorium, sort of before everything starts. Everyone's talking and it's crazy. But Gladys is so tired, she falls asleep. And when she wakes up, the conductor of the train is right in front of her. And he speaks a different language, but he's doing his best to tell her to get off. He's pointing, he's grunting, we're making noises. Now Gladys doesn't understand what he is saying, but she understands that she's not in China yet, so she refuses to get off the train. Well, this makes the conductor really mad. So now he's yelling and still trying to get her off the train, but eventually he gives up. She's just too stubborn. So he goes back, he gets the train rolling again, and it's traveling through the night, and eventually she hears a screech and the train stops. Everybody gets off, including the train conductor. And shortly after, she hears pop, 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 gunfire outside. So Gladys gets out of her seat and quickly gets off the train this time. And she finds the conductor outside in a small wooden room. And again, they don't understand each other. They speak different languages. But through a game of charades and some interesting noises and using a calendar, she understands they're here to pick up wounded soldiers and take them back. And they don't know how long they're going to be here for. Maybe for some weeks, maybe more than a month. Well, Gladys doesn't have stuff to provide for her for more than a month. She doesn't really have very many options here. So Gladys does the only thing she has left to do, and that's to get out of the train and walk back to the train station in the snow, in the night. So it's freezing cold outside, and she leaves. She even falls asleep one time, which is crazy dangerous. She could have died. She walks for more than 30 hours But again, eventually, she sees the lights of the next town. God took care of her, and she didn't die in the wilderness. She made it back to the next train station of that last stop. Now, have you ever been tired before? Okay, so Gladys is exhausted. She used every ounce of energy she had to make that walk. So she plopped down on the ground and thought, oh, surely someone will help me. Nobody helped her. Nope. They just left her on the ground. She slept that night on the floor of the train station and woke up covered in snow. She was freezing. Her body was hurting, and she was so hungry. So she had to come up with a plan. She was determined to trust God to take care of her. So her plan was to get arrested, because if they arrested her, they would have to take her to a warm jail cell, right? So eventually, an officer comes and again is motioning for her to leave, and again, she refuses and gets herself arrested. But that warm jail cell was not warm at all. In fact, the window was broken and snow was coming into the room. It was freezing. She's still so hungry. Her body is hurting. But Gladys takes whatever she has. The last thing she has with her is her Bible. Remember, she's determined to trust the Lord, and she opens her Bible, and out falls a piece of paper from the book of Nehemiah, and it says, "Do not be afraid of them. I am your God." Nehemiah 4:14. So even though her stomach is so empty and hungry, her soul has been filled up, and she is determined to trust the Lord. Well, a little while later, one of the jail guards comes and gets her out of the cell and takes her to an office where there's two officials. One of them speaks a little bit of English, and he asks for her passport, which she hands him, and he looks at it and says, "Ah, you are a machinist." And she says, No. I am a missionary. And he looks at her, and it's as though he doesn't understand that those words even sound different. Remember, we speak two different languages. Sometimes it's hard to communicate. And so he looks up at her and he says, "No, you are a machinist. We have many machines here." To which again, Gladys says, No, not machinist, missionary. She takes her Bible out again, folds her hands like she's praying. Missionary. But again, there's a language barrier. He speaks a different language than she does, and they don't quite understand. But later on, they give her 2 train tickets. So even though she doesn't know what's going on, she knows she has a train ticket, and she gets to leave this jail. So she does. She gets on another train, but with her is one of the officials. He's supposed to be a translator, which means he understands Russian and English to help Gladys communicate. But he feels more like a jail guard than a translator because he is following her around everywhere. When she gets off the train, she sees a sign in English for a hotel, and so she goes there because it's in English. It's the only thing she sees in English. But at that hotel, it's dirty, it's yucky, but there's a bed and a blanket. So she goes, and for the first time in a long time, she rests. But when she opens that door to her hotel room, the officer is there, and he continues to follow her around, and she doesn't like it. He makes her feel uncomfortable. He's kind of creepy, and she doesn't want him to follow her anymore, and so she bravely asks him, "When are we going to China?" And again, he looks at her and says, "You don't need to go to China. We have machines right here." Gladys explodes this time. "It's missionary, not machinery." Well, he continues to try to confuse her because this man is actually trying to trap her. He wants her to stay in Russia, and he wants her to work in a factory or on a machine. So he's being confusing and tricky on purpose. Well, again, Gladys is determined to trust God to take care of her. The next day, as she goes back to this hotel room, a girl quickly walks past her and says, "You need to follow me." So Gladys does. She turns and follows the girl. The girl explains to Gladys that she is in danger and she needs to get out of here. She must get her passport back so that a man can come and get her in the middle of the night to help her escape. So Gladys goes to that creepy official that keeps following her, and she gathers up all her strength. and stuffs her hands in her pockets so he can't see how much they're shaking. And she says, I need my passport back. And he says, okay, I'll bring it back tonight to your hotel room. Well, Gladys had been right all along. This man was a bad man. He did come that night, and he did bring her passport, which she quickly snatched and threw in the room because she wanted to make sure she had it. And then that man was coming to hurt Gladys. And he was trying to hurt her, but Gladys, right? She's determined to trust in God. And out loud, she cried out for God to protect her. And in an amazing moment, that man got really confused. And he stopped what he was doing, turned, opened the door, and left. And then a little while later, there was another knock on the door. This time, it was the man to rescue her. So she followed the man. They snuck out of the hotel. She followed him through the city in the darkness, and they traveled all the way to a boat dock where she saw lots of ships. And the girl from the hotel was there too. And she said, Gladys, that one, you have to get on that Japanese ship. It's your only hope. You have to get on it. And so Gladys went to the captain and explained that she was a British citizen and she needed help, but she had no money. And so God took care of her again. The captain said, well, I can't take a British passenger, but I could take a British prisoner. And if you are my prisoner, you're under my protection, and I'd have to give you to the British authorities. Which you see was his way of saying, I will protect you, and I will bring you to the good guys, and it doesn't cost you any money. So this man helped Gladys, and she got to ride on the boat. She went to Japan. She met the British authorities, and they fed her, and they took care of her. And they even bought her next train ticket. Because she's traveling to China to find Mrs. Lawson. She wants to be a missionary in China, and Mrs. Lawson is going to be her missionary partner. So she's doing her best to find her. And finally, she's on the last leg of her trip. It's just a boat ride away, and Mrs. Lawson's going to be there. So she gets on this boat. She's very excited. She's ready. She goes to the missionary compound. She opens the door, and Mrs. Lawson is not there. Nope, she's not there. We're finally made it to China. We finally made it to the missionary compound, but they know where she is. She's still a missionary in China, but she's 300 miles away. So Gladys had already been traveling for 20 days, and Mrs. Lawson is at least another 20 days away. So while Gladys thought this was the end of her journey, she's only halfway through. So Gladys continues to travel from place to place by train, by walking, and she stays at many inns in China, which is very different than the inns she had been in previously. They all share one great big bed, and she's met lots of interesting people, and there was one woman that she met, and her feet were very deformed. They did not look normal. And she learned it was because there was a practice called foot binding in China, where they would bind even little girls' feet all the way up until they were a grown-up, so they could wear these teeny tiny shoes, because in China they thought that this looked beautiful. But to Gladys, it looked very painful, and it didn't look like a good thing. But she continued on her way to find Mrs. Lawson, and finally, we're at the city where Mrs. Lawson should be. She walks in the door ready to meet Mrs. Lawson, and there is Mrs. Smith. No Mrs. Lawson. She's not there. But Mrs. Smith is so kind, and she's an encouragement to Gladys. Gladys stays there for a few nights, and she does feel refreshed. And Mrs. Smith, she knows where Mrs. Lawson is. She's actually not far away at all, only 2 days away. But the only way to get there is by mule. The passage there, the roads are so steep and so narrow, they're very dangerous. Too dangerous to even walk them. You have to take a mule because they're very strong and can walk on those narrow places. So Gladys rides a mule in a basket, and she's bumping along, and it's very uncomfortable, and she's in there for hours. Actually, the entire day, she is there walking along. Well, mules can't travel at night because there are wolves, there are robbers, because they're not very fast, so a robber could come get you, right? So they stay in these special inns that are only for mules, people that are riding on them, so they can feed the mules and take care of them. Now remember, Gladys is determined to trust God. She continues to do so, and she even tries to find things to enjoy on this bumpy ride. On the next day, she gets on the mule, and she has 7 more hours all day she needs to ride on the mule. And then finally, she gets to where Mrs. Lawson should be. Before she opens the door this time, she prays, Lord, please let Mrs. Lawson be there. And she opens the door, and guess what?
She's in there.
Mrs. Lawson is there. She finally made it. But you guys, can you think of all the things that Gladys has been through? Oh man, she was on that dangerous train ride, and then she almost died in the snow, and then she almost died in the train station, and then she almost got trapped in Russia. She's been through so many dangerous things and has had such an incredible journey, but she just got to China. We finally met Mrs. Lawson, and in so many ways, this is only the beginning of her journey.